Season 5, Episode 22 of Brackets, Bubbles, and Bit Stealers. I am Jonathan Lidskin. To my right is Sam Fetterman. Below me is Will Warren. It is the start of conference previews for the 2024-2025 season. SEC to kick things off, but first, Sam, Will, how you guys doing?
Best time of year. Almost college ball. Best time of year is March. But the real best time of year is any time from conference preview season until the transfer portal. So best time of year.
Will, welcome back.
Yeah, happy to be here, fellas. Doing well myself. People are talking about this thing. It's called football. Never heard of it myself, but real thrilled about basketball season. Happy it's back. Yeah, big day for a lot of people. Ken Palm numbers are out. Sam's gigantic MAC preview is out. Can't say it normally. I got to say it like that.
And the Huskies are playing. Yeah, the national champions are playing. The two-time national champion. Well, six-time national champions, two-time reigning national champion. We'll have Big E stuff tomorrow with Michael DeRosa. Jonathan, back to the point.
Back to the point, indeed. We have the SEC preview, our first of 5 over the next 2 days to kick things off. A little different format this year than last year. Those of you that tuned in last year might remember that we kind of had a wheel that Sam made, and we spun it around, and the teams we discussed were in random order. This year, we're going to do a little differently. We're going to alternate shows between Sam and I's rankings for the conference. I don't know how Sam does it. I think he does it this is mine, but these are strictly for me on like a who I think is better. I'm not analyzing conference schedules with the unbalanced schedules and seeing who is going to finish first. This is just strictly who I think are the best teams. So without further ado, we will start at number 1 with the Alabama Crimson Tide. They are the consensus favorite for most in the SEC. I've seen them a lot at number 1 on preseason polls. They weren't number 1 today in the AP poll, but this is a team off of a Final Four appearance that brings back plenty, including Mark Sears, Latrell Wrightsell, Grant Nelson, Jaron Stevenson, and then the transfer class and freshman class speak for itself. You have Cliff Amarui in there, the big man from Rutgers, couple key freshmen in Darion Reed and Aiden Sherrill. Aiden Holloway comes over from the rival in-state at Auburn, Chris Youngblood from South Florida, and much more. This is a super deep team. I'm going to start with Sam here. Sam, your thoughts on the Crimson Tide?
So I was very low on Alabama last year, and I still believe that my process for that thinking was the correct process, because what happened with the Tide last year is they lost they lost Charles Bediako and Noah Clowney, 2 elite post protectors, big defenders. They were the number 2 defense in the country on the Brandon Miller team. People like to think, oh, that was this offensive beacon. No, they were a defensive oriented team that year that had good offense because they had guys like Brandon Miller and Mark Sears. Last year, they did a 180, and they were one of the best offensive teams of the last 5 years and a terrible defensive team because they had no interior presence. This year, I was tweeting about that all year long. They had a lot of struggles whenever they played against a top 40 offense. They would lose those games. Those games would be track meets and they would lose, but they would dominate anyone who was not a top 40 offense, like win by like 100. And that's what they did against Charleston. We saw it every time they played a mid-major in the regular season. They won by like 70. And then this year, what do? Well, they go into the transfer portal and they get Cliff Amarui, who is one of the best defenders in the country, and he's a low post guy. But it also means that they're going to have to play Grant Nelson at the 4. Grant Nelson is a sub 30% three-point shooter, and Alabama's offense is all about three-point shooting. Obviously, Grant Nelson can shoot the 3. He is physically capable of doing so. Cliff Amarui, not quite as much. But I don't think the spacing is going to be even close to as good as it was last year. So the offense will take a little bit of a hit, but the defense will take a huge step up. And remember, this was not a team that was elite all year last year. They were a 5 seed in the NCAA tournament, or a 4 seed in the NCAA tournament, because they had a lot of problems throughout the year against really good teams. I think they'll be better against really good teams throughout the regular season this year. They won't be losing those games like 116 to 93, whatever that Kentucky score was. I don't think that type of game is going to happen again. Obviously, Mark Sears is one of the best players in college basketball. They brought in a fun transfer class, Reitzel, Youngblood. Even though Youngblood is hurt for now, I think when Youngblood comes back, he's going to be a big piece. I'm not too sure about the Aiden Holloway addition, but sorry, Reitzel's not the Millette was a transfer, not Reitzel. I said Reitzel, I meant Millette. Both guys that originally went to Southern California WCC schools. But yeah, Aiden Holloway, I don't really understand the fit there. I think Phylon's going to play when he's ready, though, for sure.
Will, any other thoughts? I know Sam kind of went pretty in depth there.
No, I mean, this team's going to. So I've been thinking about this because you pointed out, it kind of, and this has alternated every year under Oates. They've had either a top 5 offense or defense basically every season, but never a great offense and a great defense at the same time. I think that's like the one little bit holding them back because, last 4 years, second offense, 111th defense. The year before, pretty good, 20th offense, third defense. But I mean, you recall in that San Diego State game, they looked pretty lost offensively down the stretch.
Miller was also hurt in that game.
Right. And I think this year they're going to come closest to solving on both sides. Sears and Reitzel, obviously an elite backcourt pairing. Sears in particular kind of seems to be the consensus front runner for National Player of the Year, I would say. And I, whether you agree or disagree with that, it's whatever, but I think it's sensible. They're really going to need Youngblood to come back. Youngblood's got to come back as soon as he can, because you look at this roster and the one thing that I do notice here, we're talking about their starting 5, 6'1" Sears, 6'3" Reitzel, 6'4" Youngblood, 6'11" Grant Nelson, 6'11" Cliff. Huge gap there. Who is going to guard taller wings in this lineup? Because you could say Darian Reed, but Darian Reed a little unproven, and we don't know, quite how well he can do it at this level. Houston Millette, sort of the same thing. We don't know how. I think he's a good player, obviously. I think this is a good fit for him, but we don't know how well he can do it at this level with this, amount of talent around him. The one thing I'd push back on a little bit, Nelson is not a great shooter, but I feel like Alabama got around this a little bit by playing Jaren Stevenson a good bit down the stretch last year at the 4 and 5. I know it's only 31%. It seemed like he really improved as the season went on last year. Really interested to see what he can be as a sophomore. It's going to be hard for him to really break through for like starters minutes, given the fact that literally the entire starting 5 are all grad students. Like, this is a very old basketball team. Mm-hmm. But, in his specific role where he can kind of play like 15, 18 minutes a night, that's a guy that I'm really looking for a big year too.
Yeah, and you mentioned it, though. I will say, like, Darian Reed is probably their best bet at, like, a guarding bigger wings, because Grant Nelson is not a good defender. He had his moments defensively as a shot blocker sometimes, and he definitely had those moments, but I don't think he's a 40-minute defender. Houston Millette has played for some really bad defensive teams. And we don't know what we're going to get out of Naz Cunningham as a freshman, how much he's really even going to play, because this team is, as I said, they're really stacked. They have so many guys that can play. And I think that this is definitely they're my number 1 in the SEC as well. I think almost everyone has them number 1 in the SEC, and the SEC might be the second best league at the top in college basketball behind the Big 12. I think everyone agrees the Big 12 has the best top 5. The SEC probably has the second best top 5. And Alabama is topping nearly everybody's rankings.
Yeah, and my thing with this team, the more I look at it, you can sort of do, and they've done a version of this in the past where they'd funnel it inside to Bediako or whoever would be at the 5. They're going to have to funnel a lot to Cliff, and he's going to have to clean up a lot of drives to the basket. But, I mean, as much as I like the guy, 4 fouls per 40, not a small number. That's a dangerous number to be playing with, where, there's going to be certain nights where he gets in foul trouble, and who do you really turn to at the 5? I know it's going to be Nelson in all likelihood, but as we've established, Nelson not nearly as effective a defender as Cliff is.
Yeah, but I don't think that they should be really that. I don't think that Nate Oates is going to be afraid to turn to Grant Nelson at the 5 because he's not quite as good defensively. It gives them better spacing because obviously he's not a great shooter, but he can shoot the ball. He's capable of spacing the floor, and he's played the 5 for a winning team. So if you need to go to 15 minutes of that on a given night, I don't think Nate Oates has a problem with it. And I don't really think anyone should have a problem with it if they need to go to it on a given night.
Yeah. My questions with this team is, first of all, I love that, Will, you mentioned Jaren Stevenson. He would be very, very high on my breakout list that I'll release closer to the start of the season if there were minutes for him to break out. I just don't think that's the case because of how old this team is. But I would bet on his shooting percentage improving a ton. I think he's pretty athletic. And I think with a little more time this year, maybe not like 41% of the minutes, but maybe closer to like 50%, you'll see him be a much higher level impact player, just not on an average basis per game. And then the question I have about this team is like, yeah, we have the kind of gap between positions where you don't really have anyone to guard the big wings. But also, this team finished 111th defensively last year via KenPom. Cliff is a really good defender, but is he good enough to elevate that defense to a championship level? Like, we know that in college basketball, to win a national championship, you kind of have to be at least around that top 25 to 30 defensive mark. And I think if Cliff elevates them to like a top 50 defense, that would be pretty substantial. And it would mean that they're, a top 10-ish team in the country, which would be great. But what else changes about their defense to get them to that kind of level where they're a top 30 to 20 defense? Because like last year, their 3-point defense actually was pretty good. Like it was right around the 50% mark, which is, very good for a defense that was 111th. But is that luck going to kind of stay the same? They play fast, so teams are going to hit shots no matter kind of what. Like last year, at the end of the year, they were giving up 100, like it seemed like almost on a nightly basis. And if Cliff is in foul trouble, does your defense just crater into the center of the universe like it did last year?
I also don't think they're going to play as many possessions. I don't like, they were playing like 75 plus possessions as like a bare minimum at the end of last season. They were playing 80 possessions, what it felt like every night. I don't think they're going to do that again. Like they're going to be a very fast paced team, but I don't think they're going to be trying to play 80 possessions night in, night out like they were last year, because I don't think they have to. So I think it'll be I think it'll be a little bit better suited for defense than last year, just style of play wise. They're probably not going to try and go all out for the offense because they knew they had to with their personnel last year.
And an important piece here too. I mean, like Nate has dialed it back a little bit on pace since he first came to Alabama. First 2 years, 75 possessions a game, 74. Last 3 have consistently been in that 71, 72 range. That's kind of probably what they're aiming for this year. I mean, the offense is the offense. We know it's going to play fast. We know they're going to hunt threes. We know they're going to hunt the rim. And it does sort of make talking about the roster a little tough because we know every Alabama game is functionally a math problem, and Alabama solves that math equation more often than they don't. But at the same time, like we've been saying, I think we're all pretty confident, right? This offense, top 3, likely is the baseline. I mean, they could be number 1. We'll see. But I've personally got to see that defense at least finish top 40 to feel good about them down the stretch in March.
Yeah, I think that, if they're like the 50th ranked defense in the country, it depends on how well they're playing down the stretch, but I could definitely see them as a team that makes a run, or I could also see them as a team that gets out really early. It'll depend on the matchup, but I don't think they're going to lose in the first round because they're never going to do that with.
I think they're the new Florida State, where they just like can't lose to mid majors because of like something that their team does.
Yeah, playing as fast as they do, just too too many possessions for mid majors to just stay with. Because if you're a mid major, you got to shoot. You got to put up 1.3 points per possession against this, like for 2 hours.
Mid majors just won't ever have like players that can live on that shot volume and keep up. Like Florida State's deal was kind of just like, we present something to you that you've never seen before, which we have so many athletic and big dudes. But yeah, let's not get sidetracked here. Sam, you mentioned LeBaron Philon. I'll touch on him real quick. Like Rothstein was at their practice a couple weeks ago and said like he was going to play. There are a lot of guards on this team. I do like him a fair bit. Like I believe he's a top 15 to 20 freshman in this class. But I mean, when you're running out the guards that they have, he's going to have to be really outstanding to even crack that rotation. Do we have any final Alabama thoughts before we get to the next team?
None additional. I will say one name I didn't really hear you guys talk about, because you two know more about recruiting than I do at this stage of my life. Aiden Sherrill. So is he going to be a factor at all, do you feel?
He might a little bit, but I think he's a definitive project right now.
Yeah. And it is a loaded front court in terms of just like bodies to get past.
Right. Like, yeah, you have 4 dudes that are 6'11". Not all of them do the same thing, obviously. But all right, let's go to my number 2 team. And we're going to start with Will for this one, because it is the Tennessee Volunteers. You obviously lose Dalton Knecht. You lose Jonas Adu. You lose Tobe Awaka. You lose a ton of key pieces from last year's team.
Tough to lose Dalton Knecht to his new job as the head coach of Northern Colorado.
But this is a team that reloaded. Rick Barnes, if there's one thing about him that you can always guarantee, it's that this team will defend at a very high level. The reports about some of these players out of their practices, specifically Igor Milicic, have been outstanding. I really love this transfer class. I love that they have Zakai Ziegler back as a leader and just one of the best point guards in the country. Will, we'll start with you. Your thoughts on the Volunteers.
So 22-23, the dark times of, only finishing 6th in Ken Palm or whatever it was. That is a really weird team to watch, because it seemed like fans hated it, but analytics, loved it because the defense was elite and they could just kind of get by most nights. The thing that interests me the most about this Tennessee team that reflects back to that is at the end of that season, I wrote this column called The August Loss, where, Tennessee went into that Sweet 16 loss against FAU with 2 players on the entire team who had 50-plus attempts at the rim and from 3. And one of them was Olivier Kamwa, and the other was Zakai Ziegler on a scooter. They had nothing in the way of rim gravity and perimeter gravity. Every single player they added in the portal this year, 50-plus makes, not attempts, 50-plus makes at the rim and from 3, between Chaz Lanier, Igor Milicic, Darlin Stone-Dubar. I'm with you. I'm very excited about this transfer class. And, to think, among those 3, if you're going by two-way impact, they might not be the best transfers in the group. Felix Okpara, the practice reports we've seen on him, highly encouraging as a guy who just knows his role and knows what he's going to do. I don't think he's going to shoot. I am not fooled whatsoever by him randomly taking 6 threes down the stretch of last season. That doesn't seem like a feature of the game. That seems like a bug. But as a lobs guy, perfect. Don't need him to do anything more. Clean up the boards. And we already know about him as an elite rim protector. Lanier, elite offensive scorer in general. Dubar, a little wonkier. I have heard that they have been trying to rework his shot a little bit to be a little smoother, because it is a little jagged in the way he comes up. But I am also of the opinion that you probably shouldn't mess with something that works. We'll see how that goes for him. But no, I like this team as a whole. I think they've got a solid 8. But as always, it's going to be centered around how far can Zakai Ziegler take these guys. I love him as a point guard. It's going to be a very weird and very emotional senior day whenever that comes around. But Tennessee, every year you can just sort of count on very high floor, potentially lower ceiling. I don't think, obviously, that they're going to be as explosive as they were last year with Dalton Knecht. But I think that having all of Ziegler, Lanier, Milicic, Dubar, even Jordan Gainey on the nights where Jordan Gainey is hitting shots, which does happen, contrary to some reports. That's going to be an offense that, in my mind, probably ranks higher than last year's, which sounds a little nuts, but Tennessee kind of quietly just 28th in Ken Palm offense last year. That is the second highest in the Barnes era and the highest they've had, period, since Bruce Pearl was there, outside of the Grant Williams Schofield year. But no, I like what they're going to do. As always, defense is going to be, top five-ish. I do think they're going to struggle a bit at times because I don't really rate Lanier as a defensive piece. I think, obviously being locked in at North Florida and being the go-to guy on offense means you have a different load mentally and physically than you will here. Like, he's not going to be asked to do as much offensively. So you can focus a little more on D. D-Bar, I think, will hold up fine, obviously, at Para. But the real piece de resistance of Tennessee's defense, as it is every year now, is Ziegler and Jemai Meshack. Meshack, I mean, pound for pound, could be the best defensive piece in the entire conference. Just a nasty, nasty defender to go up against. And I kind of feel about Tennessee a little bit how I felt about them last year, almost the exact same, really, where I don't think of them really day one as maybe a fringe national title contender, definitely not among the Alabama, Duke, Houston, et cetera group. But like SEC title contender, yes. And I'd be pretty surprised if we get to Selection Sunday and this isn't at least a 3 seed.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think Tennessee is really well built this year. Zakai Ziegler, Armani's brother, one of the best point guards in college basketball. Kevin Sweeney brought it up on our show when we did it with him back in, when was it? May. Just the numbers that he had in SEC play once he was fully healthy. It was like 15 and 7 on really good efficiency. Elite point of attack defender. Shot 37% from 3 in SEC play last year. That was a huge step for him. And then Igor Milicic, everything that we've heard about him has been sparkling. Having a 6'10 guy that can defend, shoot, play the 4 or 5, play different spots like he can. Really good. We know about how good Meshack is defensively. Akpara, when a couple months ago, I was thinking like, all right, let's rank the Tennessee transfers by how much of an impact they're going to make. And I was like, well, Felix Akpara is going to kind of do what they can do. Is going to elevate everything that they do defensively in the low post because he's such a great shot blocker, such a great rim protector. Obviously, he's not a super skilled offensive player, but I was very high on him at Ohio State. I think he's maybe not a freak athlete, but kind of close to a freak athlete at that size. And then obviously like covered D-Stone at Hofstra. Just toughness, guy can get to the rim. He can really shoot, rebound. Back in like January, I remember thinking to myself, all right, who would be the best possible transfer portal addition for Syracuse? And it was D-Stone. And he's wearing a different shade of orange now. But yeah, I think Tennessee's really well built. I am a Chaz Lanier skeptic. I'm not. I think he's going to be good. I think he's going to be more of like maybe he averages 11, 12, 13 points a game than some people may. I don't know if there's still the people out there that think he's the next Dalton Connect. But
probably some people with like VFL or Vol or whatever in their Twitter name. Yeah.
But I think he's going to be a good piece. The guy I want to see more of this year is Cam Carr. I just don't know when we're going to see him in what situations, but he is a lights out shooter.
Yeah. So when they've had exhibition games in practice, from like the connections I do have, there have been days where he scored 15 to 20 and days where he has scored 0. And it is just truly a coin flip. But I mean, like the like you've mentioned, like the potential there is just off the charts. I mean, they don't make 6'5" guys with a 7'1" wingspan that can legitimately be 3-and-D pieces every day.
Yeah, I think that I saw Carr 2 years ago when he was a senior in high school at Link Academy, and like I still kind of think that like in the next couple years he could be like an All-American type player if he progresses that far. But like, yeah, like this team's loaded on the wings, and he's still probably buried behind some guys. We know how reliable Meshack is as a defender, and then we know what Lanier can do. I even think that like Bishop Boswell could get some minutes because of how good he is defensively. Like we know that Barnes likes those guys that can really pressure the ball and get up in your face, and Boswell does that at a really high level. Front court, to my question here, like how ready is JP Estrella as like a backup up center? Because you're not really going to use Milicic as a 5, even though he is 6'10".
I think you can use him as a 5.
You think so?
Yeah.
I don't like Milicic as a defensive 5 is my thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't think you need to use him for like 20 minutes a game as a 5. I think if you get 7 to 10 minutes of him at the 5, like a couple minutes of Estrella, and the rest go to Akpara, I think you can work with that.
Yeah, but I think like as long as this team avoids like the injury run they had 2 years ago, where it felt like a different guy was getting injured every night, I think this team is a solidified top 15 team because of just how good they're going to be defensively.
Yeah, they strike me as just like a very high floor team pretty much every night. I mean, like obviously Tennessee's going to have some. It's Tennessee. They're going to have an offensive stinker or two that sort of makes you wonder, like, oh man, I can't trust this team to make it to the Elite Eight or whatever. But no, I think, like you said, a high floor group. The center thing, I think you can get away with Milicic at the 5 at times, but you obviously have got to pair like Dubar at the 4.
Yeah,
because like that's a potentially nasty shooting offense if you put those two together out there.
I would love to see like a Ziegler, Lanier, Carr, Milicic, Dubar lineup just for the shooting.
I think it could make Barnes' hair fall out.
Yeah,
which would be very
obviously fun. That's kind of that would be part of the reason I would like to see it, just to see like if Rick Barnes is physically capable of surviving 5 minutes of that.
Justin Gainey might have to like hold him back if those 5 go in. Let's get to number 3 here. Auburn for me. This is a team that returns a lot. Denver Jones, Chad Baker-Mazara, who was infamously tossed in the NCAA tournament game last year
about it
against Yale, and then immediately went to Twitter. Chaney Johnson's back.
Like this one.
Janai Broom is a National Player of the Year candidate in Salmon eyes. Then they have some interesting transfers too. Really like JP Pegues from Furman, Miles Kelly from Georgia Tech. You have an interesting freshman in Todd Pettiford, who we have shared our thoughts about on the show many times before. But Will, I'll start with you here. Your overall thoughts on an Auburn team that is looking for their second weekend appearance since they went to the Final Four in 2019.
Let's put one finger in the air for our dearly departed KD Johnson. I know he's still alive, and I know he went to George Mason, but this is just not going to be the same Auburn viewing experience.
No.
It bums me out a little bit.
No Wendell Green, no Zep Jasper. It's like it's like if Poseidon's the thing that has the 3
trident.
The trident.
Yeah. If Poseidon's trident didn't have any of the pieces of the trident, if it was just the stick.
Yeah. Well, and Aiden Holloway too. There's an alarming lack of bozo gene.
Todd Pettiford
here. I hope. Because like not to root against the kid, but watching Auburn and not having a backcourt capable of just a massive implosion at any time feels wrong. And I mean, like you're saying, Baker-Mazara, I think, is awesome. I know he got tossed from the game. I know it's like a real bad way for his season end, but I loved the minutes he gave Auburn last year. I was really, really impressed by him. Plausible future NBA guy to me. Janai Broom, fantastic. I really need it. It doesn't really help me personally, but for the betterment of basketball, Bruce Pearl, brother, you got to play this guy 32 minutes a night. Enough of the line changes. Enough of the whole we've got 2 starting lineups. No, you don't. You have a National Player of the Year candidate. Play him 30 minutes a night. Quit it. But I like him, and I love Baker-Mazara. I do have a little bit of questions about the rest of what's going on here. Pegues is good offensively. I don't like him defensively whatsoever. I think that could be a real problem at point of attack for them. Denver Jones, another good player, but wasn't quite all there offensively for me last year. More of a role guy than I anticipated. I thought he'd be a bit more of a star of the show, but didn't quite work out. But no, I mean, this is going to be another Bruce Pearl team, which means that they're going to be at worst one of the 15 best in the nation. They're going to have moments that make you pull your hair out, and they're going to have moments at home, let me clarify, that make you think they could win the national title.
Yeah, I think this Auburn team is, I mean, really good. There's not much, there's not a ton to say that says they're not going to be really good. I'm a huge JP Pegues guy. I've been a huge JP Pegues guy for a while. I think that he is kind of like the anti Auburn guard in a way, because he is really trustworthy in big spots. I think you give him the ball and he can kind of win you a game down the stretch. Denver Jones, there was I think a Rothstein tweet today that was like, oh, Bruce Pearl says Denver Jones has taken a huge step forward. Like, obviously you take all those Rothstein tweets with several grains of salt, but it kind of gives you an insight into what the kind of staff and what they're thinking over there. Chad Baker-Mazara, as you mentioned, is really, really good. 6'7", can shoot, can defend, can pass, can dribble. Just the type of guy that NBA teams look for. We'll need to play a little bit smarter this year. Not just the gets tossed out of games, but he definitely did have some interesting moments last year. But overall, I think he's a tremendous piece to have on this team. And then obviously Janai Broome, who for my money is probably the best player in the SEC. Maybe the
best impact guy, I think, definitely for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, he's not the most skilled player in the SEC, but he's probably the guy that impacts winning the most because of how good he is defensively and what he added to his game offensively last year.
Yeah, I think this team may be better suited if they can play the correct way than they have been in previous years. Like, I know the talent is not as nearly as good as when they had Jabari Smith and Walker Kessler, but it was pretty apparent by mid-February that team was very flawed. This team, yes, it's not perfect, but I do like the fact that you don't have the worry of guards going, like, three guys going 1 for 10 from three in a game and just completely taking you out of it. Like, you probably are going to be worse defensively in the backcourt especially without KD Johnson. But JP Pegues is a really reliable shooter. Miles Kelly is another good player. And like we mentioned Baker-Mazara already. He's fantastic. I question this team's depth like every year, it feels like, but it seems like the Chris Moores, Chaney Johnsons of the world, like, they know their role for Auburn. And Bruce always gets them to at least play hard.
Yeah, and the big role guy here, and I'm always a little confused that he doesn't transfer to get more minutes, is Dylan Cardwell. I mean, like, per minute wise, the guy's a superstar. He's awesome at doing exactly what he needs to do for Auburn. Very good backup big, very skilled, does his thing, does it very well, never pouts, never asks questions, just kind of goes up there and does what he needs to do to win Auburn the game. I am curious, and I don't think that they're going to be able to do it much, but I don't know, like, how much longer you can get away with playing Dylan Cardwell only 14 minutes a night when he's as good of an impact guy as he is. But at the same time, I went to Hoop Explorer to check. They played Broome and Cardwell together just 20 possessions last year. So it would have to cause a real shift in Pearl's philosophy to run them both out there together. And I know Broome has taken a serious turn upwards as a shooter, but I'm kind of curious to see if they can get both of those guys some more minutes this year. Because like you said, the depth is interesting in that there's not really more stars, but there's just a lot of like playable guys. Like guys who know their role, know how to do it, don't really color outside the lines unless their name KD Johnson, and do like everything they need to do to basically give Auburn a floor of like 23 wins every year.
All right, one quick thing on this. So Chris Moore last year, usage rate of 10.2%, in 34.4% of the minutes. 3 players in high major basketball had played as many minutes and had a lower usage rate. Does anyone have a guess as to who one of them is?
I'm going to wager that one of them played for like Northwestern. I feel like we
No.
always have a Northwestern guy.
No.
Just tell us.
Gabe Cups, Francisco Farabello, and Camden Heide.
The last one definitely tracks.
Yeah.
I don't remember a single Camden Heide shot.
I watched.
I remember one.
I watched more Indiana than I would care to admit last year, and Gabe Cups definitely fits that criteria.
Yeah, and Farabello, another guy, I can't really remember him shooting.
No, he didn't.
Mason Miller is 5th, by the way, on this. So another Creighton guy.
100% tracks.
All right, let's go to number 4 for me. Another team that was high on last year. Sam has been especially high on this program over the last couple of years. So we'll start with him. The Florida Gators. Sam, this is year 3 now for Todd Golden. They bring back some key pieces from last year. They have a bunch of like developmental guys that were really good as young players last year and should get even better. Talk to us about the Gators, Sam.
Obviously, everything is going to start with Walter Clayton Jr. All SEC type guy. Came in from Iona. We had him on the podcast at this time last year. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get him back on this year. But the guy has taken a lot of steps over the last couple of years. Just such a talented scorer, and they are probably hoping that he's taken steps to be their point guard this year, because he's been at his best. He's always played next to a true point guard, whether it's Danis Jenkins or back in his freshman year, Elijah Joyner, or last year, Zion Pullen. This year, he's probably going to have to be that point guard. And it hasn't always gone as well for him when he's the true point guard, but he can do it. And I think that now that he's a senior, he's more experienced, he'll be ready to step into that role and make it work. Elijah Martin is there. Really good player from FAU over the last few years. Will Richard back. And the front court with Thomas Hall, Sam Alexis, Alex Condon, and Ruben Shinyelu. Even though you're not going to have Micah Hand locked in this year, Shinyelu was one of the more underrated pieces on a team that a lot of people didn't really watch last year, but were really excited about in that Washington State team. Shinyelu is huge, 6'11", 7 feet, 250 pounds, can do so much in a low post defensively. Efficient scorer. Alex Condon, a guy that had better numbers than it felt like last year, and just looked really physically ready and up to the task. Thomas Hall, another guy that can make a lot of plays, and Sam Alexis comes in, and they're going to hope he can. There's no Tyrese Samuel on this team, and he was big for them, but I think they're hoping that they can kind of create what they were getting from Tyrese Samuel from this front court in one way or another, because the offensive glass was so important to what they did last year. And also, I think the swing piece, the big-time swing piece for them is Urban Klavzar, whether he's able to translate.
Will, I'll go to you next.
Yeah, so again, like we've mentioned, everything kind of starts with Walter Clayton. I would wager I know the SEC teams have like 17 guys on them now, but we're going to assume, and I haven't looked, he is at minimum all SEC second team, probably should be first. But beyond that, I love Elijah Martin. I think that's a great pickup. Will Richard has been at Florida for about 19 years now and does exactly what you need him to do every year. But I do think, and this was kind of my surprise when I heard 4th, we're glossing over the front court a little bit here. I'm worried. I like Condon. I think he's fine, but I'm kind of looking here at like, who was your starting 4? And none of them are good shooters. Like Condon shot 28% from 3 last year. Sam Alexis, 26. Thomas Hawk, which I was shocked to find out was pronounced that way, 25. I just don't love, and obviously Chinealo, not a shooter. I don't love the offensive pieces there whatsoever. Now, defensively, Chinealo is awesome. I think that's a great get. Alexis flashed pretty well as a shot blocker. Condon, I like. I worry about this front court in a conference that consistently has very physical, very mean, very nasty front courts. How are these guys going to hold up? And last year, the problem was never Florida's offense. It was that they could not string together enough stops to get off the floor. We kind of saw that come to a dramatic head against Colorado. Not like a very well officiated game by any stretch of the matter, but they just, as simple as, could not get stops. I mean, anytime you lose a game in regulation when you score 100 points, that points to a really serious issue for me. And I love Todd Golden as a coach. Really think that he's got a level head on him. But I would feel a lot more comfortable about this roster if, like we've mentioned, Micah Hanlockton was available this year. I still think they're going to be good. I'm interested to hear the rest of your rankings, Jonathan, because I feel like you and I might be on the same level, that 4 through 10 or so is a very big mismatch of teams. But they're in this tier of, like, I think they're going to make the NCAA tournament. I think they're going to be good. I'm lying if I can tell you how good they're going to be.
Yeah, I want to say, like, my 4 through 10 in this league are all like within like 19 or 20 spots of each other nationally, which is crazy for an individual.
My 4 through 11 is all within like 22 spots.
Yeah, it's a very mushy middle of the league.
Yeah. So just real quick before we move on to the next team, like, this team is relying a lot on Ruben Chinyelu defensively. Like, his block rate last year was almost at 10%, which is nuts. Granted, it was 35% of the minutes or something like that. So we'll see, how good of a rim protector he is, and if he can stay out of foul trouble when he's playing a lot more. This team does have depth in the front court. It's just, like, not exactly like the kind of depth they need to fix their issues from last year. I'd still bank on them being an elite offensive team, even though Zion Pullen's gone. I think Elijah Martin isn't quite as good as Pullen, but still a very reliable player. And then we didn't really talk about him, but I saw some flashes last year out of Denzel Aberdeen. He's another guy that's not going to be a super great defender, but I really like him as a swing piece off the bench that can get downhill.
Yeah, I mean, Elijah Martin last year it didn't really feel like he hit the rhythm that he hit 2 years ago, because he started off injured, and John L. Davis kind of was shooting a lot more last year than he was the previous year. But I look at what Martin did 2 years ago when he shot 38% from three and was 57 true shooting percentage on 24% usage. I don't think that's what he can be in the SEC, because he's not going to be that in the SEC. But I think he can be a terrific second offensive piece next to Clayton. I do want to see him I do want to see him try to handle the ball a little bit more, because I do want there to be times where Walter plays off the ball. I don't want him to be on the ball all the time.
So the next team I have is one that I have a lot of questions about, but it's really tough to bet against the talent that they have, and that's Arkansas at 5. Arkansas has a lot of problems, in my opinion, but they also have a lot of guys who I think are could be next level players. So the problems I'll list immediately. I don't know if Arkansas has a true point guard, because we'll see what, I never really thought DJ Wagner was a true point guard when he was in high school, and then Boogie Flan kind of the same way. Both I think can be good players, but not point guards. I think they're going to rely a lot on Janelle Davis for their shooting. I don't think Carter Knox or Billy Richmond or Brazil are tremendous shooters. However, I do think that they're going to be really athletic. They're going to be able to attack the rim. And on both ends, they're going to be able to prevent you from scoring around the rim, and they're also going to be able to score on you at the rim. And so I think I'd probably bet on them getting a lot of easy shots and preventing a lot of easy shots. And that's why I have them at 5.
I think.
Yeah. Go ahead, Sam.
Well, you can go.
Okay. No, I'm going to agree with John L. Davis honestly could score 20 a game. That's not insane to me, because he is going to be the go-to guy here. I'm with you. I don't think DJ Wagner, I don't think of him as a point guard at all. Better as a combo than as an on-ball handler. I I think, and my fear for this team, you probably need a little more out of Boogie Fland than it seems like Arkansas themselves is expecting. I've been reading things lately that show Boogie as a bench player to start the year, which I was a little surprised by. But it seems like they're really committed to the DJ Wagner thing, so we'll see. I am really intrigued to see Jonas Adu in this whole Arkansas project because obviously Adu comes over from Tennessee, terrific shot blocker, very good, like very underrated rebounder, I would even say for his size. But the common theme for him at Tennessee was a serious reduction in performance against top level opponents. So you go to Torvik, top 50 quality games, goes from a +6 box plus minus overall to +3. Offensive rating drops heavily. 2-point efficiency drops heavily. He really, really struggled to meet, the level of opponents as it grew. And you kind of saw this come to a head late in the season where he got played off the floor by both Creighton and Purdue, two very different styles of teams, but two offenses that, found his holes, really, exploited them, and he wasn't able to play. And I want to see what happens if, what can Arkansas do if that happens this year? Do you run Big Z out there at the 5 and just sort of ride out the highs and lows of that? Do you potentially try Trayvon Brazil at the 5? I wouldn't be opposed to that because he is quite tall. I know he's not much a shot blocker, but he's not bad at it, and he's obviously a plus shooter. I will say I really did like Cal only getting 9 true guys for this roster. It does sound a little wonky in our current era of making sure you've got all the scholarships filled. But these are 9 guys who are all coming in and expecting to play. And that's all you really need. You don't need a 12-man rotation, obviously. You're going to have 9. I don't know how much Billy Richmond III is going to play. Probably play a good bit, at least at the start. But night one who is going to be in the rotation and generally how much they'll play.
The one thing that concerns me about that is there's like no depth in this backcourt whatsoever.
Yeah.
If anybody goes down, and you mentioned it, like they're going to need a lot out of Boogie Fland. They're going to need a lot out of DJ Wagner. I watched a little bit of Boogie Fland. He's a Stepinac guy, White Plains, so really close to me. And I think he's good. Like I don't think he can step in and be a big net positive in the SEC on day one. And if they really need him to be that, I would be concerned. That's kind of where a lot of my concern comes in. I'm with you on John L. Like John L. could come out and average 20. I don't think anyone would be surprised by that. He showed that he is more than capable as a volume scorer last year at FAU. He had some huge games. I'm not a big Carter Knox guy. Jonathan knows that. Not a big Billy. I'm just not big on like any of the freshmen. If they brought in 4 freshmen and they were like 4 freshmen that I was a little bit higher on, I'd probably be a little bit higher on Arkansas because I just think they're going to need so much out of those guys, and I'm not really convinced that any of them are major impact players or ready to be major impact players. I like Adu Thiero. I think that having three guys with familiarity with what Cal wants to do in DJ Thiero and Ivasic is good. And I also think that it's good that they're not letting what Cal did last year or what Cal was doing in Kentucky kind of dominate this team's roster either. It's not like Kentucky 2.0. There's a bunch of guys that were going to be at Kentucky, but it's not last year's Kentucky team. So I think that's big. Brazil is an interesting piece. Adu I'm a big fan of. I'm very fascinated at what sophomore Big Z looks like because I think everybody saw the flashes. He was trending number 2 in the United States during the AFC Championship game. That's a guy that has serious. If he retired after the first half of college basketball that he played, he would not be. Sorry, if he declared for the draft after the first half of college basketball that he played, he would not still be playing college basketball. He would be the number 1 pick in the draft last year because the draft was weak, and 2, those first 5 minutes were ridiculous. But he's really talented. He's big. He can block shots. How much can he stay on the floor? and how much will he actually impact the game when he is on the floor. I think year 2 Big Z is going to be a fascinating thing to watch.
Yeah, him and DJ Wagner are like the two X factors in my eyes on this team. Big Z because of the jump that he could take, and Wagner because of how much they're probably going to depend on him. Like his usage rate probably isn't going to get that much higher than what it was last year. Like despite the fact that he only played like 57% of the minutes or something like that, he had a usage rate that was like 21 or 22. And so his like my question for this team is like who else is stepping up and hitting outside shots? Because like we know Davis can. I would bet on Boogie Flan being able to do it in at least some capacity. But Cal hasn't had like a great track record recently of developing shooters since they've stayed with him. Like I think back to Damian Collins from a couple years ago at Kentucky, who everyone was convinced was their breakout guy, and then
We'll talk about him later.
he didn't develop a jump shot at all. So someone else is going to have to start hitting outside shots if this team is going to be, kind of like a tier 1 SEC team.
I agree.
And my question with them, really, I understand this is a reset for him. I get all of that. I do fear a little bit for Arkansas that like the Cal factor just doesn't matter that much anymore. And I was frankly alarmed for them that he brought the entire staff minus John Welch over from Kentucky.
Yeah, that's a problem.
And I mean, the one new ad is his son, who it seems like a good recruiter. I don't think that's a problem.
Didn't he have Kenny Payne?
He brought back Kenny Payne. So, Kenny Payne won those games or whatever. Maybe that'll work this time. But I mean, the whole attitude of we're not changing anything, that is a problem to me. And what I feel like is going to happen is that this is going to be another like very frustrating Cal team where some nights they are going to look awesome. Like would not shock me. There's a stretch in the schedule and I'm trying to hunt it down here. Yeah. Where they play at Auburn February 18th and then host Missouri 4 days later. Would not shock me whatsoever if they went on the road, beat Auburn, then came home and lost to Missouri by 10. Like that would track with what I've come to know.
Yeah, I mean, I said, like, it's not like last year's Kentucky team. I don't think they're going to be like a Kentucky team, but I think the way that the program is operating is still kind of Kentucky, and that's not great for the long-term outlook. But I think that it's a good thing that, like, it's a departure a little bit from what they were doing last year, just kind of definitely put a little more emphasis on bringing defense with Adu and with Brazil and Thiero.
Yeah, the Jerry Jones and Tyson chicken nugget money is making a lot of people happy, but
Jerry Jones, Tyson,
the talent has never been the problem.
Yeah, all right, let's move on to
next number 6 for me. This is a team that I am maybe more confident in their ranking than any other team in the SEC, and that is Texas A&M. They could obviously finish higher in the conference because unbalanced scheduling and whatnot. But I look at this roster, this is a team that again is going to put a ton of pressure on the rim with their guards. They're going to rebound really well. That's what Buzz Williams' teams does. But they're probably going to be inefficient again on the offensive end. And if they're not getting to the line, they're just going to be a bad offensive team.
Yeah. I mean, with A&M. So I like this roster. I'm going to say that straight up. I think, very old. They're going to have a high floor again. Any team with Wade Taylor on it is probably going to be pretty good. But this is now collectively year 4 of this core. And 4 of the 5 starters, they've been here all 4 years. And that's great for them. But, you toss out even including the freshman season, this is their Ken Pom finishes, 33rd, 33rd, 35th. I kind of feel like they might just be who they are. And I did actually like their transfer class quite a bit. They uglied it up big time. I know Zurich Phelps, not a great shooter, but makes a lot of sense to me as a boots replacement. Farrell Payne, whatever it is, perfect for this team where it's just offensive rebounds. He's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
Owning the boards there. And like we've said, I just feel like we know exactly what they are. And the nice thing about Texas A&M is that Buzz is pretty much confirmed, you don't have to care about this team until January. And I won't, because they just experiment all of November and December. The non-con never ends up mattering for whatever reason for them. And by the time SEC play rolls around, the second you lose confidence in them because of something they did in December, they will beat Alabama, Auburn, and or Tennessee. It is who they are. It's what they do. And as frustrating as it is to watch, I admire it. I mean, it's going to be another very good team. I'm going to set the over-under here, and you can take over-under. 30.5% from three will be my official guess for them this year, which is nasty.
Mhm.
But that feels right, I would say.
I mean, they were 29.3 last year, and I don't think they got better shooting the ball from deep.
Yeah.
I wonder. I do wonder if the Manio Basagi late season surge kind of continues into this year, because he was kind of out of the rotation for parts of last year, like playing like 5 minutes a game, and then comes in late in the season and immediately, like right after the loss at home to South Carolina, comes in and they rattle off 5 in a row, and he's scoring 18 or so points a game. He was huge for them down the stretch. I think that could be a key if they're gonna exceed expectations. Obaseki has to be really good, I think. I'm with you on Farrell Payne. I think he is perfect fit for what they do. He's like 65% at the rim, and getting like all of his shots are at the rim. Great rebounder, can defend the rim. Not sure I liked the Zurich Phelps pickup. I feel like it's kind of redundant with what they have. I know it's part of the team's identity, but when they're already so deep into this identity thing that maybe you need to start looking for some other options. Texas A&M is going to be who Texas A&M is. I don't think they're going to surprise anybody. They're going to have some big wins. They're going to have some bad losses. At the end of the day, they're probably going to be an NCAA tournament team. They're probably not going to be a protected seed. I think we know basically what we're going to get from them this year. Wade Taylor, obviously one of the best guards in the SEC. How much better can he get? How much better can these guys really get at this point?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'd have to add is like the only way I think they get substantially better to the point where it matters is if somehow CJ Wilcher is like an all-conference player, because he's the only one that can make an outside shot consistently on this team.
Yeah, that's the case for optimism to me, is like, and some of that I do wonder if it's obviously it's going to be a net downgrade going from the Hoiberg offense to this, especially for spacing. But if you're a shooter, you can get shots off and you can make them. And I think like he's going to be a really key piece, like you said, to how this whole thing goes. I mean, even if he's just the team's third best player, that's a step in the right direction for them. Like that's a key piece that'll help you move forward. But I kind of agree with the overall assessment here. It feels like Buzz is like not just like doubling or tripling down, but like, quadrupling, quintupling. Is it sextupling? Is that I should know this. I'm a math guy.
Yeah.
But this feels like they know exactly what they are. I kind of feel like I'm watching the Mike Tomlin Steelers of they are going to be the exact same thing every year, no matter who's the quarterback, no matter who's running the ball, no matter who else is on the sideline, no matter who's in office. They are going to be what they are every time out.
Oh,
this is also like, it's kind of weird too, because like this isn't what they were at Virginia Tech when he was there. Like,
no, not at all. Or Marquette, really.
No. So, all right, let's go to maybe the most polarizing team in the entire conference, Kentucky at number 7. This is a lot of question marks. I'm really not sure what to make of this team. It is one of the weirdest collections of players that I've ever seen, but I decided that I'm going to trust Mark Pope to an extent because he seems to do a really good job formulating an offense that does well for the personnel that he has. I put them at 7. Sam, I'll start with you on this one. talk to us about the plausible deniability or lack thereof.
Yeah, so something I said on the pod back in, what was it, May, was that, like, it was going to be a transition period for Kentucky going from Cal to Pope, and that the fans were going to need to have patience. And then I said that the second Mark Pope walked into that rally, it wasn't a press conference, it was a rally with 22,000 people holding the national championship trophy over his head. He lost all plausible deniability of, oh, we're building. No, you can't walk in like that and say that you're having a build year, even if you are. Then again, this is going to be a build year. It's an interesting roster. I don't think there's a point guard. I don't really think there's a point guard on the roster. I don't think Kirk Kriisa is a point guard. I don't think he's really anything. He's a lot of different things. But I don't know which one. He doesn't know which one he's going to be on a given night. And then Lamont Butler is not a point guard either. He is a defensive stalwart combo. Jackson Robinson is going to be a huge piece for this team. He's probably their leading scorer. Can score in a bunch of different ways, but not the greatest shot creator for a leading scorer on a Kentucky team. Andrew Carr can kind of step out, and I don't think he's not Noah Waterman, but I kind of get the idea of like just kind of bigger guy that shoots really well at the four, does a little bit more than Waterman did, but maybe a little bit differently as well. And then Amari Williams is one of my favorite players in the SEC, just a guy that is incredible defensively, and he can pass from the high post. I think that's part of why Mark Pope liked him. I don't really understand the whole Rick Pitino going there and wearing a Kentucky pullover. I think that's weird. But the vibes around this Kentucky team are just, it seems like everybody is happy with what's going on at Kentucky. And like it feels, I don't want to say it feels right, because like I've only known Kentucky basketball under John Calipari. He got the job 2009. That was like my first year watching college basketball. So I can't really speak for what Kentucky basketball was like under Pitino and around that time, but this feels in a way like it feels like people think it feels right. And I don't think it's going to be this year that they have a big breakthrough, but I think Mark Pope will get the job done at Kentucky. A piece that I want to say, I think could be a ceiling raiser would be Colin Chandler. Maybe the most talented pound for pound scorer on this team. You could take that as a positive or as a negative. But he could be, if he hits as a freshman in year one, then I think Kentucky's ceiling goes way up.
Yeah, so the issue for me with UK's roster is, I think you can say this about like 8 different guys on it, is that I like them, but I don't love them. There's like something specific I would change about everyone's game if I could. Where, like Kirk Kriisa, I actually like Kirk Kriisa a lot off the ball. I mean, he's a good shooter, 42% from 3 last year, but he is a terrible decision maker with the ball in his hands. Lamont Butler, not really a point guard. Kobe Bray, not really a point guard. Jackson Robinson, lead guard potential, kind of, but I was not impressed at all with him defensively last year, and I worry about that. The one Pope move that I wish he could have made, but didn't for whatever reason it may be, I wish he could have gotten Dallin Hall over from BYU. I think that would have been the perfect, final fit to what they're trying to do here. Because like you're both saying, this is very much a team to me that's like transitional year. I actually feel like they've got a higher floor than Arkansas does, but a much lower ceiling than Arkansas would in comparison. Because it's very old, notwithstanding like Brandon Garrison, who's a sophomore, or Colin Chandler as well. But it's a very old team, very experienced. and just feels kind of like they got 7 different like second bananas or third options. A lot of guys who have been the guy to the guy before, but no one on this roster has been the guy. Jackson Robinson
Hey, Ansley.
I guess Ansley, but I mean, NEC to SEC is going to be a hell of a jump.
No, he's going to be 12 minutes a game off the bench.
Yeah, that's going to be tough for him.
Way. And I mean that in a good way. I love Ansley.
Yeah. Now, Amari Williams, I could see the breakout case for, but I wonder if athletically he's going to measure up. Andrew Carr, I really like a lot from Wake Forest. I feel like two-way impact-wise has the potential to be the best player on the team. But at the same time, I go to Evan Maya's side a lot, and I went to check and prep for this to see how many top 20 players in the SEC does Kentucky have? And the answer is 0. The highest ranked is Carr at 24th. And while that sounds a little extreme, I do feel like that might be the truth. Like, I look at this roster and I have a hard time saying, like, are any of these guys among the 15 best in the SEC? Like, Robinson could come close, but, like, I don't think Kobe Bray is shooting 50% from 3 again. Carr is good, not great. You're much more trusting man than I am if you're like Kirk Creesa top 15 or Lamont Butler or whoever. So
yeah, like I think there's a lot of guys that have like elite micro skills, but I don't think there's Lamont Butler's point of attack defense tremendous. Kirk Creesa as a kind of instigator of like just he can really get people going. Like not even like on the basketball court. He's just like an energy guy and a really good one. But also a good shooter. Jackson Robinson as like a wing scorer. Andrew Carr as a stretch 4 shooter. Amari Williams as a high post passer. Kobe Brea as a movement shooter. Otega Owe has some interesting skill sets. Like all these guys have great micro skills. I don't know if any of them are stars.
Yeah, just to get my 2 cents in here, I think this team is going to do a lot of things well, but not anything at like a really elite level. Like I think they will probably move the ball well. They have plenty of shooting. They have actually some decent rim protection as well. But like, are they going to move the ball because they have a lot of good passers, or are they going to move the ball because like guys are driving into gaps and freeing up shooters? Like that's my question with this team. If this team ends up being better than we think, I think it's because Jackson Robinson elevates himself to like an all SEC first team caliber player. Like he certainly has the athleticism and the tools, but like he wasn't really playing all that much at BYU last year. And like, I know nobody did, but like, is that going to change with a roster that is built to play 10 guys? All right, let's go to number 8. We'll start to get a little quicker on some of these teams once we get to the bottom of the conference. Texas at number 8 for me. First year in the SEC for them. Another really interesting roster from Rodney Terry, who we just adore on the show. You got Jordan Pope coming over from Oregon State, multiple Indiana State transfers, and Julian Larry and Jason Kent, Tremont Mark by way of Arkansas, originally at Houston, back in the state he was originally in. Arthur Kaluma, a last-minute portal ad for them as well. And then they have some freshmen. Trey Johnson is supposed to be one of the best freshmen in the country, but this is just a really weird roster that was thrown together by Rodney Terry, and it always is with them, but this should be a pretty athletic team and not a super deep one.
We did a full preview of Texas with the Jason Kinander that you can go back and listen to for some deeper thoughts, but I raised the concern of Tremont Mark and Arthur Kaluma both left like really good situations on top 10, 15 teams in the country where they were starters and key contributors. Seemingly, obviously there must have been something behind the scenes, seemingly for little reason, and played for disappointing teams last year. Even if the numbers were solid, they were clearly not impacting winning at a high level the way that they were at their previous stops. So I think that adding two of those guys is kind of interesting. I think they're both really talented. And I think they can both make big impacts. If this Texas team is really good, they're both probably going to be pretty good, and I don't think it's impossible. But I'm very low on Texas versus the consensus. I have them in like the low 30s. I know they were ranked in the AP poll like 19 today. I don't really see that. I think I'm not as big on Trey Johnson as most people are either. I think that Rodney Terry has a lot to prove, and by that that's a very nice way of saying I don't think he's very good.
Yeah, so I would say I don't think Rodney Terry is terrible. I think he's a fine coach. I've kind of seen people living in SEC country. I see people run into this a little bit with football, where you can be a good coach, but you can't be an elite one. I think Rodney Terry can be a good coach. He's going to go up in certain games in this conference. So and we're going to get to them. I know the perfect comparison to me is Chris Jans at Mississippi State, where when those two take the floor, I feel very confident that Chris Jans is going to outcoach Rodney Terry, and it's not going to be particularly close. And is that Rodney Terry's fault? Maybe so, maybe not. But I just don't trust him to get the most out of this team. And like you guys have said, very confusingly built roster where I don't know, man. I like aspects. I'm trying to be nice. I like Caden Shedrick. I know he never plays that many minutes, but per minute wise, he is a very good player, quality defender. I think if you're just a Virginia guy in general, you're always going to be a good defender. And I like that he knows his role and seems to do it pretty well. Coming around a little bit shooting wise too. I'm into adding Trayvon Mark from Arkansas. Last year, a bit of a lost year with Musselman kind of running out the strings. So I don't blame him too much for that. I thought he was awesome offensively. Not a huge fan of him defensively, but he's fine. You can get by with that. And even Julian Larry from Indiana State, I think that's a very good add. I would like to be confident that going to night one, they're going to start Julian Larry and bring Jordan Pope off the bench, where I think he'd be a little bit better as a microwave scorer, because I know Jordan Pope is not a good defensive piece. But I just don't trust Terry to do that. The Kaluma thing worries me. I think Kaluma has gotten some shit he probably shouldn't have gotten, because he's still he's a good scorer, he's a good rebounder. Impact wise, he's not amazing, but if you can have him as a role guy, not the worst thing in the world. He's a solid player. But you're adding him to the mix when he's been he was kind of a negative part of the mix last year at KSU. It didn't seem like Creighton fought all that hard to keep him the first time around. And with that, so you've got Mark, you've got a couple other guys I like, but I feel like you're putting a lot on the shoulders of Trey Johnson as a 5-star freshman. I think Johnson's going to be the best freshman in the league, but I also think that might not mean what it used to mean, because this is such an old conference with a lot of old guys in it that are really good. It would be a success for him if he's one of the 15 best players in the league. That's a really good season for him if that happens. And
Sam, what's the Kaluma line? Either he's the worst good player in the country, or
the worst good player or the best bad player. That was Greg Waddell.
It's kind of I had a buddy who used to say this about Jay-Z, who's the worst great rapper of all time. And it's yeah, that kind of works. That could be Arthur Kaluma.
That's what I've said about Tony Romo for years.
The worst great quarterback, worst good announcer too, I guess.
And my dad, who's a Cowboys fan, said it about the Cowboys yesterday. They're the worst good team.
Yeah.
Sam, any final thoughts here on Texas?
I like the Indiana State guys. I think I want to be clear on that, and I do like both Larry and Ken.
Yeah, no, I was a huge Julian Larry guy last year. Jason Kent, I said all year, was the most important player for Indiana State, the way they played. And I said that just because of what he did for them. And I think it showed in the 2 games he missed. But I think the spacing here probably going to hurt the production that you get out of Larry and Kent. Going from the Shirts offensive system to the Terry offensive system is a tough one. Let's move on to my number 9 team, Mississippi State. This is a team that seems to be sacrificing a little defense for some more offense with the additions that they made. Kanye Clary, I think, is the most notable one. I didn't really expect Chris Jans to take on this small guard like identity. But if it works, it works. They got a lot out of Josh Hubbard last year. He was one of the best freshmen in the conference. And then, you still have some reliable guys like Cam Matthews, I think is really good for them. Michael Onwoko as your starting five. You have Riley Kugel over from Florida in there. And then, they have some guys off the bench that intrigue me too. I thought Claudell Harris had a really good year at Boston College last year. Sam, I'll start with you here. What are your thoughts on Mississippi State?
I'm confused. Like, I don't really think they needed to do this. I don't really think they needed to put in the money and go get another small guard. I think Clary is, in a way, like an addition by subtraction for Penn State. And I don't think they needed another high vol. Like, they could have been like what they are. Mississippi State is what they are. They're physical. They're a physical, defensive oriented, and I think they're still going to be that. Because you look at Cameron Matthews and they bring in Melendez and Nwoko, they'll still be a great defensive team. But I don't think they're going to be as good defensively as they have been, and especially considering you're playing probably 2 5'10" guards a lot, and I don't really like that. Especially that they're both kind of ball dominant. Kugel had a down year as well last year at Florida, so I didn't like the offseason, but I like Chris Jans enough, and I like Josh Hubbard enough, and I like Cam Matthews enough to still think this is a good team.
Yeah, and like when you have Hubbard and Cam Matthews together, that's a pretty darn good base to build on. Like you can go in a lot of different directions with that. Hubbard is fabulous. I feel like he came in well ahead of expectation too. I know he scored a lot in high school, but it's one thing to do that in high school, totally different thing to do that in the SEC as a true freshman.
By the way, UConn starting lineup: Diarra, Solo, McNeely, Caravan, Sampson.
No Mahaney.
No Mahaney.
It's interesting.
That sounds fine.
Yeah. There kind of had been some rumor, not to get sidetracked, but there had kind of been some rumors that Mahaney wasn't going to start.
Yeah, we'll talk about that tomorrow with Michael DeRosa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you can keep going.
All right. Well, so yeah, I don't love the Hubbard-Clary pairing either. I think that's a potential perimeter defense disaster, honestly. And I would really like to see them play Claudell Harris at the 2 with Hubbard. And I know it'd be a step down, and at least based on what you guys are seeing, and I'm sure it's true, Mississippi State probably spent a decent bit of NIL funds on getting Clary to campus, as well as Riley Kugel, who we'll get to. But Harris, I just think, is a better fit with Hubbard. Doesn't have to have the ball in his hands. Good shooter, better defender than Clary. I mean, not like either is great, but he's a bigger size guy, can defend a little better in the system. But as usual, I know what I'm going to get with these guys. You're going to have Hubbard to score the points. They'll have Harris and Clary to back him up. You got Cam Matthews, possibly, one of the very best defenders in America, I would say. I am fascinated, though, beyond that. I think that they're going to have a high baseline, top 40 team, all that. The swing piece to me is obviously Riley Kugel. If you get freshman Riley Kugel, this is a top 25 team, possibly top 20. I mean, he was really darn good down the stretch for that first Todd Golden Florida team. And then last year, I remember watching a game, and it might have been Tennessee, it might have been somebody else. But I thought to myself at the time, I haven't watched a game this year where one specific player was so clearly trying to not run the offense the other 4 players were running. It seemed like an active, protest of some sort. And I don't know if he was upset about something, or you never want to get into somebody's head too much. A lot of different stuff could be going on, but I think a reset's good for him. I don't really know which is closer to the truth with him, though. And I think until we find out, I've got to be a little conservative on Mississippi State. But at the same time, I anticipate they're going to make the NCAA tournament. They're going to be extremely annoying to play against if you're a fan of a different SEC team. And, between he and RJ Melendez, a couple of really fascinating interconference transfers there.
Yeah, just real quick before we move on, I'll shout out Delquan Warren, who's a freshman, played at Our Savior Lutheran in OTE with Ian Jackson and Elijah Moore. He's kind of the unknown Peace, who's playing at a high major in that team, but I was pretty impressed with him when I watched the film. Decent, pretty good shooter. Also ran an offense pretty well. So let's move on.
Also think Eric Payman can be kind of like the consummate Mississippi State type guy.
Yeah. Okay, let's go on to number 10, which for me is Georgia. This is a team that I'm kind of not blindly taking a chance on, but I think this is by far Mike White's best roster in Athens. You have a couple really good transfers coming in Justin Abson, who's one of the best defenders in the country from Appalachian State. You have Dakota LaFew and Shane Montgomery, and RJ Godfrey, I thought was impressive at the end of the year for Clemson. And then Tyron Lawrence from Vanderbilt. The key for this team is Silas Demery a true point guard? He was good last year, but is he a true point guard? Blue Kane, I thought we also saw some flashes of. And then Asa Newell out of Montverde was a productive piece for them on the defensive end. I'm not sure how much we'll get from him offensively, but this is a pretty deep team that I think could surprise some people.
Among the most fascinating teams that we're going to be watching early in the season, in my opinion, because there's a lot of different ways that they can play their guys, both in the front court and in the back court. And I don't really know which is what way they're going to go with. Like Demery, Lawrence, Kane, Montgomery, LaFew, and that's 5 guys that I'm not really sure which group of 3 can play with which group of 3. I think Deshane Montgomery is going to be really good. I think he is ready to step up into this SEC. He was 67% at the rim. He was 38% from 3 last year. He is athletic, super long arms, can attack the basket. I'm hoping that he can be a little bit more of a playmaker this year as well. I think Demery can be a point guard, maybe not like a really great point guard. If he is a really great point guard, then Georgia's going to be really good. I think he can be a point guard for them. Blue Kane, the guy that I like as well. Tyron Lawrence, I'm not sure where we are at this point with him. And then in the front court, again, you got Newell, Godfrey, Santo, and Justin Abson, like 4 guys. I don't know which group of 2 is going to play with which group of 2. Like they could line up in so many different ways with these 9. And then they also have Savo Dresgic and Dylan James, 2 other guys. I don't know much about really either of them, but could be interesting pieces as well. I love Abson. I think he's really good. Santo is super physical as well. RJ Godfrey had some really good games, as Jonathan mentioned down the stretch last year. I think there's a lot of pieces here. I'm not sure I trust Mike White to be the guy that strings it together and plays a good tune on the violin.
Took us long enough.
I was waiting for the but there, because that's my exact same but with Georgia. Is I don't have a reason to be in on a Mike White team until I've got a reason to be in on a Mike White team. Because at the blog this summer, I did the study on over and underperformers for coaching. There's a lot of different ways to measure this, but a fun one that I like is taking like how you performed versus Ken Palm's preseason projections, which we all know aren't perfect, but they're honestly about as good as the sports. Like they're about as good as the sport gets, I would say, for preseason projections, at least from an analytical, objective view. Mike White has not beaten those in 8 years.
Oh my God.
He is 0 for his last 7. And I, hate to be the bearer of bad news for brother Mike, but, being 67th in the Ken Palm rankings that dropped today, not a great sign. I don't think they're that low personally. I mean, I'm with you. The talent here is really tantalizing. I like the Asa Newell ad. I don't think he's going to be as impactful as Trey Johnson, but I think he's going to be a good player. Abson rocks, tremendous rim protector. That's going to play in this conference, even at a very slightly undersized 6'9". I like RJ Godfrey as a role guy. I don't think he needs to be anything special. Nothing wrong with adding a role player. But my concern, as has been my concern with Mike White for years now, is the offense. I cannot tell you without really squinting who the plus offensive player in this offense is, because Demery kind of quietly sucked offensively last year. He was good defensively, I thought.
Mhm.
Blue Kane came into his own a little bit more in conference play, so I can see the optimism there. But I'm with Sam. I don't really know which three goes with which three. I have never particularly been a Tyron Lawrence fan, a very inefficient volume shooter who I kind of feel like his name value comes from 2 months in the 22-23 season when all of Andy shot the lights out for a little bit there. I don't like this roster offensively at all. But at the same time, I think this is going to be the best defense Mike White has had in a while. Like, I think they could be really darn good defensively. Like, Patson is great. Demery was a really good perimeter defender for a freshman. Blue Kane came in a little bit above expectation for me. RJ Godfrey, obviously, going to be very good defensively. Even the Mount St. Mary's guys did really good
Duchesne's a
defensively.
great defender. Dakota, not as much.
Yeah, but they had good stats. Like, I can see the vision there. So, and like the freshmen, we'll kind of see how they come in. But weird team where I actually think they're going to be more frustrating to play against than usual. And to Mike's credit, I would guess that night one they would probably beat 67th by year's end. But I can't pick them to make the tournament, which I feel like he should be doing by now.
Yeah, I just to the last thing to add on them, like Demery was excellent defensively last year, I thought, but if he's going to be their starting point guard, like because they don't have Justin Hill anymore, if he's going to be their starting point guard, 99 offensive rating, 17 assist rating, 19 turnover rate is just not going to play. Like if that's going to be the case, they could end up being even worse than the 112th they were last year.
Yeah,
they really need him to take a leap. Let's go to number 11. This is kind of the surprise ranking for me in terms of like the low team. Ole Miss is at 11 for me, and like I don't have Ole Miss that far from like 6th or 5th. Like the middle of this conference is just a complete jumble. But the reasoning for Ole Miss being so low is I just don't think that like they have the size to play in this conference really at all. Like I think they're pretty athletic on the wings with Morrell and Davis, and they do have some intriguing pieces. I like the Padula ad. They really did need a true point guard because as good as Juju Murray was at Eden Sports last year, he's not a true point guard. But like Malik Dia was great at Belmont, but can he guard fives in the SEC? Same kind of thing with Mikal Brown-Jones. And same kind of thing with like I don't think John Ball is ready at all to play at an SEC level. And if you're banking on him to give you impact minutes at the 5, I think it's going to be a tough year.
Yeah, I mean, Mikal Brown-Jones was a 4 at UNC Greensboro. I don't think he's a 5 in the SEC. I don't think really there's any 5. Like Malik Dia would be a much better 4 than a 5 in the SEC.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this team will have the ability to score, though. I think there's a lot of scoring options between Padula and Murray and Morrell and Brakefield and Dia and MBJ and Dre Davis can score. I think that a lot of different guys on this roster can get a bucket in a bunch of ways. And I think that on the wings, they'll defend. Dre Davis can defend. Morrell and Brakefield can do a little bit of that. But yeah, the problems come with defending at the 5 and also post scoring. I don't think there's going to be a lot of that in either direction. I'm higher on Ole Miss than you are, but I've dropped them a decent amount in my rankings from where I originally, maybe not a decent amount, a little bit from where I had them in my original rankings. Because just when I saw this amalgamation of talent back in May, June, I was like, oh, wow, this is a lot. Like they are a center away from being like a top 15 team. And I kind of put them kind of tentatively around like the 18 to 20 range, thinking, all right, when they get a center, I'll put them there. And they didn't get a center.
Also, like you won't ever really find me talking bad about a Valley guy, let alone like many players in general. Like I don't want to like Malik Dia does a lot of good things, but I think this transition is going to be really tough for him. And like I thought he was a positive offensively for the most part for Belmont last year, but his numbers were really inefficient. And I know he was like the top usage guy in the country, but are you going to get him to be able to play under control when you like have to play him more than he did at Belmont?
Yeah, that's kind of where I question this. I don't want to doubt Chris Beard though, because he's had a lot of success as a head coach at a bunch of different spots. And I saw stats that somebody had in the Discord that was like, aside from his first year at Texas Tech, he hasn't been below, aside from his first year at Texas Tech and his first year at Ole Miss, in his time at a high major, he hadn't ranked below 21 in KenPom. And he hadn't ranked below 18 in defense, aside from his first year at Ole Miss and his first year at Texas Tech as a high major coach. So, like, this is a guy that he's a tremendous coach, but who knows if this roster is built defensively the way that it has been. And also without the charge as much as it was a factor at Texas Tech. I know it's a corny talking point, but it's a talking point. But it's real. They were 141st in defense last year. It's a real talking point. How much of the Texas Tech, Arkansas Little Rock defensive success was the charge, because they used that more than just about any other team in the country.
My concern with that, so obviously defense, I think that's number one concern. I've spitballing a list in public here that I think should exist. The official, there's only one ball teams of the year.
Yeah.
This might be number one. There are 8 players on this roster with a 21% usage or higher last year. Most of any team in the country. Only UCLA has 7. USC has 7 as well. But, I mean, there's just a lot of guys on this roster who can score and will score, but are used to being like the guy or the number 2 guy. And you got 8 dudes. They can't all be the guy or the number 2 guy. There's not enough ball to go around. Like MBJ, Dre Davis, Matt Morrell, Sean Padula, Brakefield, Murray, Malik Dia, all of those guys are going to want to shoot the basketball like early and often. And is everybody going to play nice? I don't know. That's a serious question for me, is like, they have a massive amount of talent. Like you've said, if we were going on talent alone, I think this would be maybe top 12 team in the country. They are crazy, crazy talented all over. And I don't worry as much about the size. I've got some fears there, but I'd be a little less worried if like MBJ, like I think of him as honestly a pretty good undersized center, like not his main go-to, but he can do it. Malik Dia, TBD. But I mean, the roster as a whole here is just like very confusingly built to me. Like you've said, guard play is going to rock. Like Jalen Murray's awesome, Morrell's awesome. But we're kind of at a point here where like Dre Davis is the 1+ defender on the entire roster that you can point to and be like, that guy's going to work. And beyond that, it gets thin real fast, because I think this could be, and I know like we've joked about the charge thing, but the secret of the Texas Tech defense was like they were extraordinarily athletic and very hard to crack at the wing. And that doesn't exist on this roster. There's no real good point of attack stopper. And this all kind of goes without the part of like Texas's defense hasn't quite been the same since Beard parted ways with Mark Adams. Beard's defense is what I was going for, but it's not been quite as high level. And what this honestly feels to me is like a Dollar Tree version of that first Texas team Beard had, where like the amount of talent added via the portal was overwhelming. Like analytically, night one, that was one of the 4 or 5 best teams in America. And by the end of the year, they were a miserable team to watch because they couldn't share the ball well, and everybody wanted it in their hands, and they could not ever figure out how to get on the same page.
Some people had that team number 1 to start the season.
Yeah, like that team was extraordinarily hyped. And I mean, again, Chris Beard has forgotten more about basketball than I'll ever know. I don't doubt that. But I look at this team, and I saw the AP poll come out today, and I saw them like 24th or whatever. And in my head, I was like, that's just not going to age well. I don't see a way that ages well unless They are way better defensively than we all think.
Sam, if Ole Miss misses the tournament this year, does Jarrett Culver go on the man this guy can really coach list?
No, I think Mark Adams goes on it.
All right, let's get to number 12. We only got a couple more teams left here. We'll try to get through them pretty quick because we're getting into the range of like this team probably isn't making the NCAA tournament, or at least there is a way worse chance than them making the tournament.
We gotta move quicker.
Number 12 for me is South Carolina. This is a team that I think might have a first-round pick in Colin Murray-Boyles, but outside of him, I have a lot of questions. You're going to maybe be starting a freshman in Cam Scott. I don't think your bench is really that deep. I don't really think I know Nick Pringle is going to be the starting five here, but when you have Nick Pringle, I think it's important that you have a good center to pair with him because I don't think he should be on the floor a ton. I'm not sure Jordan Butler can play at this level. He was really, really bad at Mizzou last year. Jamari Thomas is really interesting, but again, like the transfer from the MEAC to the SEC is a huge jump. It might take him some time to get adjusted. I think this team will be okay because I think there's a chance that Colin Murray-Boyles is like an all first team SEC type player, but there's a lot of questions for me with this team.
So what I said about South Carolina last year, and I wrote this in my top 100 previews this year, and it was I feel like a lot of South Carolina's success last year was kind of zigging while the rest of the SEC zagged. Like they were playing slow, gritty, post-oriented defensive basketball, just trying to be the more physical, aggressive team, while the rest of the SEC was just trying to go all out, shooting the ball, playing as fast as possible. And teams were caught off guard. I don't think teams are going to be caught off guard by that anymore. And I don't think there's BJ Mack anymore. And I think that he was kind of the key piece of what their identity was last year. Talon Cooper and Michi Johnson are also gone. I think Talon Cooper was really good last year. Michi Johnson, I have some more conflicting thoughts on. But yeah, CMB is going to be really good. I texted Jonathan earlier today to make a list of guys that have been called projected lottery picks at some point this offseason. That list might be 45 people long, but he's on that list. I think Jamari Thomas is an interesting pickup. I was excited for him at VCU. I'm more excited for Max Schulke to be back at VCU, though. I'm not sure how well he fits going from MEAC to SEC. That's a big leap. I think he's good. I think he's good enough to make it work a little bit. I just have too many questions about this team to be high on them.
Yeah, and like it starts basically for me with like CMB, top at worst 8th player in the conference, for my view. I think he's going to be just disgusting on both ends of the court. And that might be enough to give you a high floor. But the rest of this roster is just kind of underwhelming. I think the front court's going to be good. We've got CMB at the 4 and Nick Pringle at the 5. Nick Pringle got a little underrated, I thought, for Alabama. But you can do a lot worse than adding a guy who finishes well at the rim, picks up a lot of fouls and rebounds. Like, that's a solid SEC piece to have. And he's done it at a really good team. I mean, he's probably going to be relied on to get 25 or so minutes here. But I was, one, very puzzled that Michi Johnson left. He was such a good fit for this scheme and everything Lamont does. And I don't feel like he's going to be quite the same fit with Diebler. That was kind of a strange one to me. But like you said, they're really going to miss BJ Mack this year. That was the straw that stirred the drink for them. And I can't point to who the immediate replacement would be. I am frankly stunned, once again, to remember that Miles Studi still has college eligibility. I feel like he has been around forever in the sport. But yeah, this is like it's a very traditional, like 13th, 12th, whatever place SEC team to me, where they are there. They will play basketball. People will watch. But it's going to be a very, barring like Sam said, zigging where everyone else sags, very unmemorable team at year's end where like they are playing, they're there, but you're not really going to remember much of what they do.
Yeah, I think, Sam, that's actually a really good point that I hadn't thought about because like we saw it last year, and this kind of transitions into the next team as well. But we saw it last year where like you had this new SEC coach that like scheme was kind of unique and not really everyone figured it out, and then the next year everyone did, and that was Dennis Gates at Mizzou, who and like South Carolina and Mizzou were also like kind of similar in that aspect where they won a lot of close games and like the analytical numbers really didn't like them that much. So that'll be something to monitor for the Gamecocks this year. In Mizzou's case, this is a team who I have 13th. They are still looking for their first SEC win in well over a year at this point. They were 0-19 in conference play last year after making the second round a year before. You know, this is it does feel like they did a better job with roster construction this offseason, but I'm going to be really interested to see how Dennis Gates plays this team. His 2 years at Mizzou, I think I've gone like 3 of 5 predicting the starting lineup at the start of the season, which is just like really bad when you're predicting a starting lineup for a high major team. Like, I like the Tony Perkins ad. I think he could be this team's best player very easily. Guy that pressures the rim at a really high level, really gets in your face defensively. They need Caleb Grill healthy. They need Jacob Cruz to be a big addition, both for in the rebounding aspect and the three-point shooting aspect. A lot of questions for me at the center spot on this team. You have a really unique freshman in Peyton Marshall, who's slimmed down a ton, but still a really big dude that looks like a football player. And then Josh Gray, who played at South Carolina last year, speaking of them, and didn't play a whole ton, but people expect him to have a big year defensively, I should say here.
Yeah, I mean, with this group, I like you said, love the Tony Perkins ad. Tony Perkins, honestly, one of the most underrated players in America at this point. Just such a good impact guy all over the court and a very good, scorer when he's got the ball in his hands. I've never been a big Caleb Grill guy. I just don't see it offensively at all with him. But like you said, center is a question. I don't like Josh Gray. I thought he was very mid for South Carolina for several years, but none of the other options are really that great. Mark Mitchell is a very intriguing ad from Duke that I like, but I don't know where you can really play him and be satisfied. I guess the 4 with a really strong center, but it doesn't seem like Mizzou has a strong center. So is he going to play out of position kind of at the 5? Jacob Cruz has to be really good offensively for this team to reach a new level. I liked adding Marcus Warwick. I think that's a good one. I mean, again, kind of like very bog standard 12th through 14th place SEC team. They will play. They're going to be, I think, a lot better offensively this year, but hard to point out the ball stoppers on defense.
Yeah, I think Tamar Bates had a really good year last year. He's probably not going to have the same role this year, but I think he'll still be a very important piece of this team. Caleb Grill's going to be an important piece. Mitchell, though, is kind of the key difference, I think, defensively. He'll be a good defender for them. It's just that, yeah, I don't really know what we're looking at 5 here, and there's a lot of question marks around. I think there's a lot of question marks around like just how good can some of these guys be, because yeah,
they still have a lot of guys on this. Like, they have 15 guys like that are scholarship. Like, Dennis Gates, like from the moment he got here, like talked about how like they were going to use NIL to like get guys like scholarships to have like deep teams, but like they have 15 guys that can like theoretically play for this team. And I'm not sure that like half of them are SEC caliber players. And like I'm sure Aiden Shaw and Trent Pierce are great guys, but like I think it's pretty well established now that like those aren't SEC caliber players.
Yeah,
I will miss Mabor Majok, though. One of the most fascinating basketball players in human history.
Yes. Coastal Carolina will be must watch.
He was a slight positive for us at points last year. That's how bad it got.
Oh God, Gavin's gonna clip that and make and like put it in a museum on a loop.
He probably will. All right, 14 for me is Oklahoma. This is I kind of thought it was the make or break season for Porter Moser last year, and they kept him around. And so I'm going to say it's a make or break season for Porter Moser again. Sam, I'm going to start with you here because I know, I'll just come out and say it. If there are 0 Duke Miles fans left on Earth, Sam is not alive anymore.
Yeah. I think that I'm not even super high on Oklahoma. I have them in the 60s, but Duke Miles might be the most underrated player. And I know I've probably said this about a couple of guys, but Duke Miles might be the most underrated player in the SEC. He plays on the ball. He plays off the ball. He does both at an elite level. He shoots from 3. He shoots really well from the mid-range. He can get to the basket at a high level. He's a great playmaker, and he's a solid defender too. This is not just an SEC. I think he's an all SEC player this year. In my mind, Dayton was best when Kobe Elvis was playing well. Bryson Goodine can shoot the lights out. Jaden Jones and Glenn Taylor are interesting pieces too. Same with Jalen Moore. Jeremiah Fears, if he's as good as Oklahoma, if he's as good as the buzz has kind of been for him, then that combo with Duke Miles can be really good. I don't think he's as good as the buzz has been for him. And they don't really have much at the 5 that I can really trust in. Porter Moser hasn't given me any reason over the last couple of years to trust him. But yeah, if there are no Duke Miles fans left on Earth, I have gone to Mars.
Now, Duke Miles is awesome. I'm so glad he's on this team because last couple of years, it wasn't like Oklahoma was bad. I mean, I liked Javian McCollum last year, but Duke Miles is a level ahead of that for me. I just think he's such a sick player. I mean, yeah, no disrespect at all. But I'm not out on Porter. I should be. I know I should. I'm an idiot. But I can't get there with being out on Porter just yet. I don't know what it is, but you look at his 3 years at OU, there has been some truly despicable close game luck they've had with how they haven't been able to win more games. They have struggled with being just a fine team and a great conference. That's a really hard position to play in where you can legitimately argue if Oklahoma was in the SEC last year, they would have been in the tournament because they probably would have lost 1 or 2 less games because the Big 12 was much better than the SEC was. I think that hurts his resume a little bit. And it obviously is harder to win when you don't have Drew Valentine running your defense, but it's still been quite good on that end of the court. I thought the offense came around a bit last year, but I think it is just going to be better this year where you've got Duke running the show. Could be Elvis, solid piece. I like Jalen, I like some of the other pieces they've got here too. Jalen Moore coming back is a good one. That's a nice returner to have. Glenn Taylor shot quite well in limited minutes for St. John's. Even Jaden Jones off the bench from Long Beach. Very, very tough defender. I like that. Seems like Jeremiah Fears is playing quite well too, if you listen to practice reports. I'm not in. I wouldn't go that far. But there's a category of team here where it's frisky but not important. And I think Oklahoma's in that category of they might only win 7 or 8 SEC games, but they're going to be annoying. And I like that about them.
We did when we did the SEC, when we did the Mizzou preview with Matt Watkins, he was all over me for saying, "Hey, I don't think Oklahoma's that bad." So I'm glad you're with me on that.
Yeah, they're not that bad. People are looking at them because they've missed 3 tournaments in a row and possibly more. I don't have their page pulled up, but because Porter has knocked on the door so many times and hasn't gotten through, I think people are really down on them. And to me, that's a good buy low opportunity. It is a hard place to win at, truth be told. It's not a rowdy crowd, but statistically over the years, it's been pretty darn hard to win at Oklahoma. And it's going to be a new place for some of these SEC teams to go play at. I wish, sincerely for his sake, he had done a much better job with scheduling in the non-con, though, because this is a sloppy slate of teams. You never really want to open with your first 4 being Lindenwood, Northwestern State, Stetson, and TAMU Commerce. Just if you're trying to make the tournament, I would do better than that.
I think I can name a combined. I don't think I can. I don't think I got one.
Yeah, and
no.
your best.
Alesso at Stetson.
Okay. And I understand, like, they've got a preseason tournament. They'll play some good teams in. Like, they're going to open that one with Providence, I believe. But just, you needed, like, one good road game somewhere in here. Like, especially just to test yourself before SEC play, if anything. I think they whiffed on that. But I'm with you.
Who do they play in the SEC ACC Challenge?
They play Georgia Tech at home. That is probably about right standings wise if you match them 1-to-1. But that being at home, Georgia Tech unlikely to be top 50, I would say. Like, lean probably more no than yes there.
Yeah.
So I mean, at best, that's a quad 2 to add to your list. It's not awful, but I don't know, man. It's a tough situation where I actually like Porter. I like this roster, but they're going from one loaded conference to another.
Yeah. Like, to be fair to Porter, he has finished in his 3 years 30th, 54th, and 46th in Ken Palm. Like, that's not terrible by any means. They just, you'd like to see him crack the tournament and, be there more consistently, as hard as it is to win at Oklahoma. We got 2 teams left. We'll go Vanderbilt first. They are 15th. Despite what some people we interact with on Twitter say, Jerry Stackhouse is no longer coaching this team. It is Mark Byington, who was at JMU, had a really good team there last year. This roster intrigues me. Like, I don't think they're going to be good, but I've always kind of been an AJ Hoggard fan. Like, I didn't think he was great last year, but I thought he was pretty good early in his career at Michigan State. Jason Edwards is just a big-time scorer from North Texas. Front court has a lot of questions, but
especially with Johnny Wright hurt.
Yeah, I think this could be an intriguing team that could steal some games they're not supposed to. I certainly think they're better than they were last year.
I like Vandy, like legitimately like Vandy. I think that if you're going to make Jason Edwards work in the SEC, this is how you do it. You put him next to a playmaking and defending 6'3", 6'4" point guard, and you have him as mostly an off-ball guy. I think that's how you make it work, and I think he is going to be stellar. I think Jason Edwards is going to be a really, really good player. I like McLaughlin. I love Chris Mannon. Now the question comes, they were already thin in the front court, and now you lose Kajani Wright for the early part of the season or however long that's going to be. Jalen Carey needs to take a big step up. I don't know if he's ready to do that. But this backcourt is really good because you also have Grant Huffman and MJ Collins, who are pretty good. I think what Byington did to build a year one roster is really good. It's a talent infusion for a roster that really needed it. And I think that they will have a chance to win some games.
By the way, AJ Hoggard got suspended for a game. I don't know.
Yeah. Who was that game again?
It's whoever the
UMES. That's not
Maryland Eastern Shore. Cleo Hill Jr.'s first game as a Division I head coach.
Oh. I like this Vandy team a lot, and I didn't anticipate saying that. When they had the whole thing happen with Stackhouse getting canned, and it kind of seemed like they were going to get Chris Mack, and then they didn't, and then they ended up pivoting to Byington. But I feel like that might be a blessing in disguise for them. Byington, really good coach. I was a fan of Stackhouse's offensive designs, but I do think, like, on a net value, Byington's a better in-game coach. Certainly a better program and roster builder. I'm with you. I don't like this front court. Center is a real glaring red flag to me because it's basically going to be Jalen Carey or nothing, because I don't really know if Wright is out for a while, who else plays the 5 and is good at it. Can't really point to anybody there, but the backcourt is going to rock. Hoggard is really good. Jason Edwards is awesome. Mannon, tremendous per minute player. I think offensively these guys could rock. Like, they could be top 20 in America offensively. And that's going to play even in an SEC with a lot of other good offenses. I put them 11th temporarily in my SEC ranking. And I felt like that might be a little high, but I'm a believer in Byington. I'm a believer in this offense. And I think that they can scheme up enough to get by defensively night over night to be fine. Not awful, but just fine. And yeah, man, I like this group. Good team, fun team. really important to just essentially purge everything that was there last year, because there was, I mean, they did bring back JQ Roberts, who is frankly not good, but I understand it, at least from a quote unquote veteran view of like, we got to have somebody who's played here before. And, turning that whole roster over is a net positive for everyone involved. I just think that's a good thing. Byington year one is going to be good. I know I criticize this for Oklahoma, but I actually like Vandy's scheduling strategy for a team that needs wins and needs to build excitement. A lot of, quote unquote, easy home games here, where Cal, I guess, is your toughest home opponent. And I don't know how you guys feel about Cal. I think they're going to be like okay. So a lot of easy build up there to get the fans excited, get some buy-in. And then once you get to SEC play, obviously competition's going to step up. But as we've noted, this offense is going to be pretty darn good, and it's going to be hard to stop for certain teams in this league.
Finally, team number 16, LSU, Matt McMahon, year 3 after coming over from Murray State. Like, I'm gonna be honest. I think they added the wrong things here in terms of
Yes.
transfers. Like, I would have been perfectly okay if they're bad. Like if they let Mike Williams run the show at the point. Like Jordan Sears is good, but Williams showed some real signs of being a good player last year, and now they're just gonna kind of bury him on the bench behind Sears and Cam Carter. I think their wings are not good. Damian Collins is not what he was once projected to be by Kentucky fans, and they just don't have a lot of SEC caliber players on this team. Maybe Sears and Carter are really good together and they steal some games, but I would think that is their ceiling.
Yeah, I mean, one of the high major teams I've done the least research on is LSU, because I'm quite certain they're going to be the worst team in the SEC. They are just overall, as you said, not a ton of SEC caliber players here. The Sears-Carter combination is talented. It would be tremendous in it would be really good, really, really good in some other leagues. I don't know if it's going to work in the SEC. I don't know who of their bigs are good at basketball at this point. I want to see how long it's going to take for Curtis Givens to get on the floor, because I think that's an intriguing piece of not just this program's future, but as a guy that can kind of be, of this program's future. I don't know really where I was going with this, but he's an intriguing piece of the future. I want to see what he can do.
Who's this team's starting center?
Is it
I truly don't think they have a remotely even average option.
Fountain?
Maybe
that's bad, but Fountain.
The burner ball depth charts have Damian Collins listed as the starting center, and he is just not a center.
Oh, why?
Reed is a 4. Fountain can be a 5, a bad one, but a 5.
Yeah.
I mean, Collins next to Reed, Reed can kind of play as a 5. He's more of a 4, but this is not a functional team.
I like Cam Carter a lot, but he can't shoot. So
yeah, this is just a very boring team to look at. I mean, it's hard to generate much of any thoughts, because I look at this roster and it's well, these are some guys who are playing basketball. Yes, they're there. Jordan Sears rocks. I like him a lot. Very, very fun offensive player. I wish that he were. It's weird to say this. I wish he were either 2 inches taller or 2 years younger, if that makes sense, because I could get a little more excited about his future with LSU if he were a sophomore or junior and had just scored 22 points a game, than as a 5th-year senior coming up, where you get him for 1 year. He raises your floor a little bit, but probably doesn't make you a tournament team, and then that's it. I think he's just kind of going to get lost nationally in the shuffle. And like you said, the centers here suck. There's not a forward on this team that I like. I would struggle to say there's a wing on this team that I like. It really is Sears is cool. Williams is fun. I like Bailey as a defender. I think he's a nice piece to have, at least off the bench, if nothing else. And Cam Carter, as annoying as he is to watch, frankly, does raise your floor. He's a good starter. But man, this is year 3 of McMahon, and this is a real test case going forward of. And I know that it worked out for a little bit at Iowa State for Steve Prohm. It worked out for a little bit at A&M for Billy Kennedy. And Mick Cronin has been an objective success story. But considering that everyone wins at Murray State, I kind of wonder if the gravy train is going to stop a little bit for coaches there going forward, where like this is year 3 for McMahon at a school that has money and lots of it. And the best you can do is 95th in Ken Pom.
Everyone wins at Murray State except for the guy they currently have.
But even he's won before.
Yeah,
he's done it
in the Ohio Valley.
In a much weaker conference, of course. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just don't like this for him. It's a bummer because he is a local guy here in East Tennessee. He's from Oak Ridge, Tennessee. But it just doesn't seem like, and statistically, like roughly half, 2/3, whatever of hires aren't going to work out. So from that massive 6-coach class a couple of years ago in the SEC, at least a couple of guys were bound to not work. And he seems like the obvious, first guy to go of those.
And on that topic, there are also a bunch of new coaches in the SEC this year. I think you know where this question is going.
Yes.
Do you think that any of the new coaches in the SEC this year, which ones are you highest on and which ones are you lowest on long term?
Long term, I've staked up my position as a Byington fan. I saw when this hire happened, some Vandy fans were a little disappointed or underwhelmed, I think, because they had bought into the Mac thing. But Byington long term really works. I mean, he was great at Georgia Southern towards the end, was obviously awesome at JMU. I think he's just, I don't know about him recruiting wise, but I think in-game coaching wise, he's really darn good. Pope, I think at Kentucky, you just have a baseline that you're never going to go below of competence. And I think as long as he has the funding, he's going to be good. I will say, a little worrying that he could not produce a single tournament win at BYU, despite having some real talent there and some honestly very good teams towards the end. So I am a little worried about that with him. I kind of think John Calipari might be last of long term.
How long
older.
is he going to be at Arkansas?
I think John Calipari is probably the most likely to make a Final Four within the next 3 years. But I think he's also the one that's the most likely to get tired of the whole thing and retire in 3 years.
Yes.
And say, yeah, well, what was the point of this? I mean, I think he's going to be fine there. I don't think it's going to be a terrific tenure. I'm higher. I think Kentucky probably wishes they could have done at the time, at the time they wanted to do better than Mark Pope. And I still think if you're Kentucky, you should probably be aiming higher than Mark Pope, but I don't think they're going to be disappointed in Mark Pope long term, unless they're expecting him to win national championships every single year, which
they do.
They kind of do. And Byington, I'm a fan. As you said, you're a Byington fan. I'm a Byington fan. I think JMU is also just another place that has really gotten hires right recently. You think Byington, you think football. They got Kurt Cignetti right. Bob Chesney's doing well, and they've hired Preston Spradlin for basketball, and I think that's really going to work. I've written multiple things about how much I like Preston Spradlin.
Yeah, I do think it's funny that Calipari was, he left Kentucky because he was kind of ran off by a crazy fan base, and if he doesn't achieve what Arkansas wants him to, that fan base will do the same thing.
God, he doesn't even have a national championship there. So,
any final thoughts? I think this is from a national standpoint, I think this conference is probably getting 9 teams in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, 8, 9, 10.
I think there's a real argument for 10. It is really darn hard to get to 10, even in the mega conference era, just because statistically speaking, if you're going to get 10 in, at least one of those will have a losing record in conference play. And that's kind of a hard sell on the committee. But I would guess day one they get 10. It could be a weird year where you get 10, but you don't get any 1 seeds, because one of my predictions in my preseason article is that I think number 1 and number 16 in the standings are going to be separated by 10 or fewer games. There's just a lot of talent, especially in that mushy middle we talked about earlier, from 4 to 10 or 11, where like any of those teams could win 12 and any of those teams could win 8. And I genuinely could not tell you what's going to happen for any of them. But even the worst team in this league, LSU, is probably top 100 nationally. I wouldn't say that they're like great, but they're not garbage, I would say.
Somehow 51st in KenPom.
Yeah, I didn't put them in my top 100, and it was a lot more just like I wanted to put some mid-major teams in there.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, like every team in this league, barring a complete like catastrophe with injuries or just like they're way worse than we think, is probably a top 100 team in the country. But like you kind of said, like in terms of NCAA tournament stuff, like somebody has to lose games, and like that's the real problem you run into getting these like 10 bid leagues.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing about the SEC in particular, and we're going to get to have this conversation all year long because people, I guess, love it now, is the who's the best conference question, where like probably if you averaged out all the teams, the SEC is number 1. I know they're number 1 in KenPom, but I mean, you're looking at it right now, and I think all of our top 10 teams we mentioned, we'd have inside a top 40. That's pretty darn good, but Alabama could be the only team we have inside a top 10. And that's the real question mark for me, is like the Big 12's high end is better, objectively speaking. I don't think it's a real battle, but the SEC's bottom and middle could be the best in America.
Yeah, the SEC doesn't have Colorado.
Yeah, SEC doesn't have Colorado. They don't have Utah. They don't have
a potential disaster at UCF.
They don't have whatever West Virginia is, revolutionizing basketball.
Yeah, I have 11 teams from the SEC inside my top 40. Ole Miss was my 11th, and they're 39th.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the other top conference in college basketball, the Big 12, in like an hour with Isaac Trotter. That's going to be a really fun show as well.
Sam, you want to take us home?
Oh God, I haven't even thought of it yet.
It's harder than I make it look sometimes.
Yeah. Boys, can I make one more comment here?
Yeah, go for it.
I want to shout out you two. You're younger people than I. I'm a little washed up at almost 31. I've got gray in my beard now. But I wish this podcast had existed when I was 20. I learned a lot from listening. I do listen even when I'm not on it. You all, when I did this last year, Jonathan was all in on this guy named Josh Hubbard, who I'd never heard of before, because I only pay attention to recruiting rankings these days. And that was the first I'd heard of him. You guys loved him. And I knew from night one to look for him because of this show. And so I want to shout out you guys. You do a great job. Keep doing what you're doing. And as always, before I get played off the stage here by the Oscars music, happy to be a part of it.
Thank you, Will. We really appreciate you coming on.
I don't think we have any freshmen in the SEC that were as high on in that regard as we were with Hubbard last year. But again, if you came to hear about Tyler Self and where he's working, you came to the right place. If you came to hear about Chris Beard and the Charge, you came to the right place. And if you came to hear about the latest happenings with Caleb Grill, we didn't talk a lot about Caleb Grill, but we did kind of talk about the latest happenings with Caleb Grill. You came to the right place. This is season 5, episode 22 of Brackets, Bubbles, and Bid Stealers, the first of 5 conference previews over the next 2 days. Thank you so much to Will Warren for joining us. We'll be back in about an hour with Isaac Trotter and the Big 12.